Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, August 5th, 2025, and Colonel Wilkerson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Good to be with you, Nima.
And your professor, I want to let people know that you teach as well. You're both Colonel and Professor Wilkerson.
Yeah,
Welcome.
double life.
Yeah. Let me start, Larry, with the new escalation between the United States and Russia. Some people may not grasp the importance and the gravity of what's going on between the United States and Russia in terms of the use of nuclear weapon, threatening, intimidating Russia, and putting after in the United States withdrew the nuclear missiles that can be used in fighter jets in 1980s, and the Trump administration has decided to put them back in Europe, and he's talking about nuclear submarines closer to Russia. What does that mean in your opinion?
Nima, under the PSYOP, as it used to be called, the Strategic Integrated Operations Plan, very esoteric planning for all manner of nuclear deployments, and including all the submarines, both attack and ballistic missile. You don't make comments like this. Trump is an idiot. He has no idea what he's doing. And I suspect neither does Pete Hegseth, because he's not impressed me with his knowledge of things either. And let me tell you just what I mean by that. Not to detract from the public comment from the President of the United States, which grows increasingly idiotic and insane, but the truth of the matter is simply that submarines, ballistic missile and attack, SSBNs and SSNs are always deployed. And they have to be by mandate in their patrol areas. The ballistic missile submarines, because they have to be able to shoot and hit the targets at which their missiles are aimed. So they have to be there. Footnote this, they're almost always trailed by a Russian submarine, just as Russian ballistic missile submarines are almost always trailed by a U.S. attack sub. That's just the rules of the game. Attack submarines are a little bit different, but they do have patrol areas, and they have to be in those patrol areas by orders, by designation. Used to be in the PSYOP. I don't know if they still call it the PSYOP or not. So this is a hollow threat, and the Russians know it. Their submarines are orchestrated in much the same manner. So they're there. So Donald Trump saying they're there was just utterly ridiculous. But for him, it was a threat. And for many Americans, and probably some Russians, it's a threat too, because they use the word nuclear. Now, as I parsed his remarks, I didn't know if he was referring to a SSBN, that is a submarine that can shoot nuclear-tipped missiles, or he was referring to a nuclear submarine, meaning its power plant is nuclear rather than gas turbine or some other method of propulsion. So you don't know. We have more nuclear submarines by that definition than the Russians do. We also have more ballistic missile submarines than the Russians do, but they're growing old. And this is what Trump should have said something about to the Congress of the United States. And Hegseth, I hope, is saying something about this also, now that we're on submarines. Submarines are growing old in the United States, very old in some cases. They need replacing, both the attack and the boomers badly. And what's happened is the programs to replace them, the Columbia class, the Virginia class, and the other classes of submarines, the ones to replace them, those programs are so overcost and over time, beyond the time they were supposed to deliver, that by law that the Congress passed some years ago, they should cancel both programs. But they can't. They can't really, because these programs are strategic programs that are part of our nuclear deterrent. So Trump is playing with something that he knows absolutely nothing about. I suspect Hegseth knows nothing about it either. And it's very dangerous Now, let's go to the connotations that Americans and Russians and other people in the world might have put on these statements. Yes, they're dangerous. They're extremely dangerous. Much more dangerous was deploying U.S. nuclear weapons to England, which you may recall happened just a short time ago. More dangerous than that is what Reagan did, Ronald Reagan as president, or threatened to do back in his first term, I think it was, and that was deploy Pershing missiles to Europe. And in his second term, I believe we did begin to, if I remember right, we did begin to deploy some Glickums, ground launch cruise missiles, Pershing 2s in most cases. This was extremely destabilizing, and many would say that it was part of the reason Gorbachev decided to close down the Cold War, so to speak. I don't think it was a major reason. I don't think it had anything to do with it, but there are people who would argue for that. So these kinds of deployments of nuclear weapons closer to your enemy, if you will, are really, shall we say, threatening and in many respects destabilizing. And they're destabilizing in an area of warfare, nuclear warfare, that is very dangerous. So we have an idiot as a president growing every day, Nima, more demented. And I'm convinced I've had some people tell me who know these things. They told me the same thing about Biden. Told me the same thing about Biden in his last 2 years, that Biden was not running the government. Jake Sullivan was running the government. Tony Blinken was running the government. Neither one of them would use the constitutional amendment to remove Biden because they didn't want to remove themselves from ultimate power. That's the problem with that amendment. It's a dumb amendment. It's a typical congressional, I didn't think about it, amendment, because they won't surrender power. These cabinet members will not get together and surrender their power. So you're never going to get rid of a demented president. Well, Trump is showing the same signs in many respects, and some new signs, that Biden showed. He's not in full possession of his faculties. Many would say he never has been, but in this case, it really is a physical problem. No one's going to say anything about it, though. Certainly no one in this cabinet full of sycophants. But it's a very dangerous situation we're in. You could say, on the other hand, and some of my Russian contacts would, that Medvedev is just as bad as Trump, that he's gone off the deep end too. I don't think that's correct. I think Putin very carefully uses Medvedev when he wants a real attack dog type statement. He puts it in the mouth of Medvedev and lets it go. So I don't think he's demented as I think Trump is. But this is a very dangerous situation to be threatening one another with nuclear threats. It simply wasn't done during the Cold War. And when it was done, like, for example, over Cuba or Berlin, which was, I think, more dangerous even than Cuba, but lasted over a long, hot summer, it's extremely dangerous. It shouldn't be being done. That's the nitty-gritty of it.
I think when it comes to the reasons of this sort of behavior on the part of Donald Trump, many people would ask, why does he need to do this? And here is what he said about the reasons for that.
Oh, I bet I can imagine.
Nuclear submarine. Oh, yeah. Well, we had to do that. We just have to be careful. And a threat was made, and we didn't think it was appropriate, so I have to be very careful. So I do that on the basis of safety for our people. A threat was made by a former president of Russia, and we're going to protect our people.
If Biden were to make a threat, a former president, Trump would toss it off like, oh, Biden's an idiot. No. At least he said you got to be careful. I mean, that I wouldn't think would come out of his mouth. I don't think he ever thinks that he has to be careful.
Why does he need to go nuclear to respond to Russia?
I think he thinks that that's the ultimate threat, and it is in reality as well as in delivering it. And he has none left other than nuclear. I mean, the only threats he can up himself to now are more heinous and more dangerous nuclear threats, because he's entered the realm of the ultimate threat.
It's somehow, Larry, amazing to me that Europe is in the middle of this mess, and they don't care about what, because when we talk about the threat of having a nuclear war between the two superpowers, Europe is in the vicinity, right, in the neighborhood,
In the
and
middle.
in the middle. And I think, and something happened, Europe going to be destroyed. I don't know if the leaders in Europe recognize that
Yeah.
the
Nima,
importance.
you don't have any Helmut Kohls. You don't have any Francois Mitterrands. You don't have any leaders like that in Europe. Merz, he doesn't. I don't think he even understands the dimensions of the problems he's gotten Germany into. You have, well, let's just go back, and I think it was Kohl. It might have been Merkel, but I think it was Kohl. It was earlier than Merkel, who one day in an off moment essentially said over the telephone, if I looked at the transcript correctly, this was a conversation with H.W. Bush, as I recall. It's our land the missiles are going to land on. And he, right, especially if you were talking about the old scenario where the Russian 10th group, or the attack group that Olgarkov was in command of at the time, a very, very aggressive Soviet commander. If the group of Soviet forces, Germany, came through the Fulda Gap and we were going to nuke them, which was our plan, we were going to nuke them. The Germans said, that's our land. That's our place. You're going to nuke. And you're right. They're not thinking that way today. They're not thinking that way, which takes me back to Colin Powell's conversation in 1989, when he had listened to Gorbachev in St. Catherine's Palace and listened to Bush and Reagan and others when he was National Security Advisor. And he said, we will be without these people. The Mitterrands, the Kohls, the Majors, the Thatchers, we'll be without them. Very shortly, we'll be without them. And there will be no one in Europe whose feet were in World War II. 13-year-old, 12-year-old, whatever, but their feet were in World War II. That is going to change everything. Well, it's changed it for the worse in this respect, because no one over there in leadership position anyway seems to understand what they're talking about and how serious it is, and how we are absolutely treatyless now. We have no restraints. There are no treaties governing nuclear weapons other than START, and Putin has said, I think rather unequivocally, he said, sorry, I'm not going to renew that in February when it goes dead with a deceitful nation like America. So we are going to be totally treatyless then. There will be no treaties, and we'll be in a nuclear arms race that says, China, build all you want. Russia, build all you want. We'll build to match them, and we'll go bang, bang, bang with trillions of dollars wasted, which none of us can afford. And the world growing more dangerous and more subject to destabilization and destruction than ever before, even worse than during the Cold War. I already think, Nima, we are already at a point right now, given the absolute inutility of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, given the aspirant powers we have in the world for nuclear weapons status, given powers like North Korea, Pakistan, and India are two more, I would say, are volatile nuclear powers. We're at a point right now that's more dangerous than any time since we invented nuclear weapons.
The propaganda, Larry, by the way, is so thick, and you look at the way that Donald Trump was somehow talking about the conflict in Ukraine, and right now, the difference is unbelievable before being elected and right now.
Yes.
And here is what Donald Trump, in my opinion, what Donald Trump and his administration are doing is it's far worse than what the Biden administration, considering the attack on nuclear bombers, considering the escalation, which we know the Pentagon has decided during the Biden administration not to go that far, not to escalate that much. But it seems all those red lines are just have been crossed by the new administration, the Trump administration, and he's somehow he's making this sort of propaganda. Here is what he said about the casualties on the part of, he was addressing the submarines going closer to Russia and addressing the casualties on the part of Ukrainians and Russians.
Before you play that,
Go ahead.
I was just going to add, it's not just Donahue, General Donahue, that made impolitic and destabilizing remarks about ground forces against Russia and Kaliningrad. I'm hearing from the Pentagon, from very reputable sources, that the planning going on right now, a la General Donahue and others like him, is really, really dangerous, because they are actually contemplating entering the war in Ukraine. Actually contemplating it. And the Brits are too. And probably the Germans and French, but not for very long, because their publics will throw them out of office if they do that. I'll make that prediction. But we are making it even worse than you're hinting at, Neiman. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Wow. Let me just...
They put out a statement, and the answer is they are in the region, where they have to be.
Did you say what Steve Witkoff's message will be to the Russians? Is there anything they can do to avoid sanctions at this point?
Yeah, get a deal where people stop getting killed. They had a number that just came out that a tremendous number of Russian soldiers are being killed. And likewise, Ukraine, a lower number, but still thousands and thousands of people. And now we're adding towns where they're being hit by missiles. So it's a lot of people being killed in that ridiculous war. And, we stopped a lot of countries from war, India and Pakistan. We stopped a lot of countries. And we're going to get that one stopped, too. Somehow we're going to get that one stopped. That's a really horrible...
Look, just listen to the lies. We didn't stop India and Pakistan. We didn't have anything to do with India and Pakistan coming to a reasonable understanding and not going any further in the conflict that seemed to be blooming. We didn't have anything to do with it. I know that for a fact. Someone needs to ask Marco Rubio what he did. And the insinuation there, very strong insinuation, I like the fact that he says he's going to end it, but he said that before and didn't, and didn't, and didn't, and didn't. But the strong insinuation there is he swallowed the lies that Ukrainian intelligence, and I suspect CIA and Mossad and MI6 too, are telling him about casualties. That's simply a bald-faced lie to even insinuate that the Russians are taking anywhere near the casualty numbers that the Ukrainians are, either WIA or KIA. And all you have to do is look at the recent exchanges to understand that. The number of dead Russians is minuscule. The number of dead Ukrainians is huge. So I would say right now, the Ukrainians are probably, and have been for some time now, taking 16 or 17 to 1 for every Russian casualty. Now, you got to remember that the Ukrainians started out with roughly 38, 39 million in their entire country, have lost 6 or 7 million in refugees and people just leaving, have lost enormous numbers in casualties on the battlefield. Many of the wounded never going back to anything because they're seriously wounded. And the Russians still have millions, not just in citizenry in general, but also several millions in their military. They've got 1 million probably troops they could call on within the next 6 months at any time they wanted to. Trump is befuddled. He's just not served very well. He's either a bald-faced liar, which I'm sure he is on occasion, or he's getting really bad information from the people who are supposed to be serving him. And if you just watch Pete Hegseth when he's around Trump, and you see the way he sucks up to Trump, and the way every word that comes from his mouth he's looking over his shoulder to make sure his boss really liked it, and gets increasingly untrue as his boss does like it, then you got to ask yourself about the Secretary of Defense too. We know he's not a good manager. We know he's not a very knowledgeable man, certainly not in national security affairs. And we know he's a sycophant because he proves it every time he goes on to say anything, whether it's in the Congress or it's in front of his president or it's at a cabinet meeting or whatever. So what kind of advice is Trump getting? Now, here's what I hear that gives me faint hope. I'm hearing that the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, not so new now, is really a brake on this. And that as best he can, he's trying to keep Hegseth from acting the fool. And he's also trying to make sure the information gets through to the president that's genuine and actionable intelligence, if you will. That's hard. That's tough because you've got the Secretary of Defense between you and the president by law and rule. But the new chairman empowerment under the Goldwater-Nichols Act gives the chairman the right to tell the secretary he's going to see the president or communicate with the president. And the secretary has no right to tell him not to. He can say, no, you're not going. And some might. Hegseth might be one who would. But I think Kane would probably persist because the law's on his side. The latest amendment to the National Security Act, the so-called Goldwater-Nichols Act, and the ones that followed that, they give the chairman real power. So I'm hoping, I'm assuming, and I'm hearing that Kane is going around Hegseth or through him to the president and trying to get to Trump and tell him when he's making grievous errors. Now, if you know anything about Trump's personality, and I know you do just from watching him on television, that might not do any good because Trump might just turn to Hegseth and say, what do you think? And Petey's going to say what he thinks, which is uninformed, stupid, and sycophantic. So we're in trouble. The empire is in far greater trouble under Donald Trump than I ever thought it would be at this particular stage in its deterioration. I mean, it's been deteriorating ever since the end of the Cold War, but it's rapidly deteriorating now, domestically and internationally.
What's dangerous, in my opinion, is the way that they're trying to build the rhetoric, these sort of lies. And because if you remember, before Israel attacking Iran, they were talking about, Netanyahu was talking about the Iran has been destroyed and the house of cards. Just go there and just put an end to the regime change, put an end to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and which wasn't the case. But when it comes to Russia, it's unbelievable, the ignorance. He said that he said tremendous numbers, but he put it in a post and a social truth or on X. He said that Russia has lost 112,000 soldiers since January this year, and Ukrainians lost 8,000. You know,
Preposterous. Yeah, absolutely preposterous. But someone's given him that information. I don't believe he's making this up from whole cloth. He's a liar. He's a serial liar. There's no question. But I don't think he's making this up out of his serial lying capacity. I think he's getting that information. And I think he's getting it from CIA, MI6, and Mossad through Hegseth and others. I can't believe that Kane would go along with that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff isn't going to step in and say, Mr. President, you got to quit talking about these casualty figures because you're lying. You're not intentionally lying. That's the way I'd put it. But you're lying because you've got bad data. You've got bad information. You wouldn't believe this, Nima, but we have been taking most of the information that we call actionable intelligence about the Ukraine war since the special military operation started, and even before, from MI6, Mossad, and CIA. And you know where they're getting their information from? Ukrainian intelligence. So you know why it's skewed and why it's badly skewed, because Ukrainian intelligence doesn't want its supporters to know how badly it's being shellacked by the Russians. Now, why we're doing that is beyond me. I mean, I saw some really, I'm the guy who went to the UN with Colin Powell. I saw some really bad tradecraft, bad intelligence work. Sorry, DCI, CIA head. I saw all of that up close and personal. But I knew that down in the bowels of the CIA, and I discovered this in spades afterwards, too late, that there were some people who objected, some real intelligence professionals. There are real intelligence professionals in the CIA today who object to what's going on. Why Tulsi Gabbard hasn't done something about it, and I know the director of CIA isn't going to do anything about it because he's an Israeli clone. He works for Bibi Netanyahu. But Tulsi has some independence that I thought would have been put to use here, and she would be contradicting some of this, and even going public with some of it to the Congress, at least, as she did with the Iran situation. But I think she's turned into a coward. I think Tulsi Gabbard has proven her true colors are yellow.
As time goes by, and considering the two conflicts, I would assume that these sort of they were expanding the conflict to the northern flank of Russia, to the southern flank of Russia. You see what's going on, and if you go into that extent, you see that China comes in,
Yes,
Iran comes in. You see, I would argue India comes in.
yes.
Yeah.
Increasingly so, as Trump makes India another enemy of the empire.
And we know that what is the main reason of that. It seems somehow they're trying to put pressure. Trump has an ultimatum on Russia, and I don't know when that ultimatum it was 10 days. I don't know when would that
50 days, 10 days, 5 days. Oh, I've changed it again.
But what's going on, considering all these mess that we're witnessing, that many countries are getting into the conflict? And India was somehow, during the Biden administration, they tried to manage India somehow. They tried to put pressure on India, didn't work, and they just let it alone and let them do the work. But it doesn't seem that would be the case for the Trump administration. And I don't see India backing down on buying Russian gas and oil.
No, I don't
They're
either.
not gonna-
And I got to tell you, I don't see anyone in the administration on the NSC staff, where there should be someone, or at State Department, certainly not Rubio, who's now both National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, supposedly, meaning he's coordinating the entire decision-making apparatus as NSA and doing foreign policy as a Secretary of State, doing either. He's not doing anything. There is no one who seems to understand, one, how painstakingly presidents from George H.W. Bush forward have worked with India in their nuclear program and in other realms in order to ensure that India was a friend, if not an ally. Not a formal ally, but a friend. And most of its actions were taken with consideration of what the U.S. interests were in those actions, to include its nuclear program, which we were really worried about as we let them get more and more in their civilian program that we knew was going to be converted to their military program ultimately. And now there's none of that. There's no expertise in this government whatsoever with respect to dealing with India. They're just killing all of that good work that was done by the administrations before them. They're killing all that diplomacy that was executed in order to create the relationship with India. And for what purpose? For what purpose? To satisfy Trump's desire to yell at everyone, to tariffs on everyone, to, demonstrate how powerful he is as American president. What he's doing, Nima, what he's doing is demonstrating how weak he is making America. And he's going to wake up one day, maybe, and realize that and not be able to backfill at all, because he will have ruined about everything that the empire was trying to do that remotely was in its interest. What Trump's trying to do now, the most glaring deficiency about Donald Trump, and this is what makes me think that he, in my darker moments, I think he might be someone's agent, or at least acting in the agency of some foreign power. Because everything he's doing, instead of rescuing the empire momentarily, or at least stopping its fall from power precipitously, is doing the opposite. It's causing us to go down faster, more completely, more dangerously. And that winds up with the empire making a decision to use nuclear weapons when it realizes that it is over. It is truly over. Everyone in the world is again. Look at Israel, microcosm of what I'm talking about. The fury over Israel right now is growing by leaps and bounds all across the globe. I don't know if you watched that video of the Australians on the Sydney Bridge. That was incredible. I mean, that was absolutely incredible in that terrible weather. Even the protest organizers had no idea so many thousands of people were going to show up on that bridge. That's testimony from down under, of all places. That's testimony to how this situation in Gaza is affecting the globe. I would expect at any moment to find the United Nations finding its own courage and tossing Israel out, period, out. You're gone. Don't even make application for reentry for 10 years, 15, 20 years. You're gone. You're out. You are not considered by this body, duly constituted, and sitting here in the city of New York, you are not considered a state anymore. You are an outcast. Go away. Wouldn't surprise me.
He's going after states, and he said that any state that is supporting or boycott Israel, they're not going to get any disaster aid from the federal government.
He's going to find out just how much.
He's fighting Americans for the benefit of Israel, for the benefit of Netanyahu. I would argue even mostly Netanyahu and his administration are running.
Yes.
What's so amazing, Larry, I don't know if you saw the interview that the former Israeli intelligence had on Russian TV and they say RT. I don't know if it was something else. He mentioned Epstein, the link between Epstein and the establishment in the United States, the establishment or the presidents of the United States. Here is what he said. His name is Ori Ben Menashe. He's a former Israeli intelligence.
Epstein's lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, came on this show, the emeritus professor of law at Harvard, and said, no, Trump's behavior as regards Gaza, as regards bombing Iran, as regards bombing Yemen, all his behavior can't be explained by any blackmail tapes of Trump. Do you believe in any way that the genocide in Gaza is being prolonged by the late Jeffrey Epstein?
I certainly believe that the Israelis are making sure that the Americans do not stop them from the killing in Gaza. I believe that the American government is sort of trapped by the Israelis. Jeffrey Epstein is one of their tools to trap them.
And what do you think of Dershowitz's denial?
Hold on a second. I want to give you an example. Bill Clinton, President Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak met Arafat in the 90s, and there was no deal. The reason was Epstein. They were being blackmailed by Epstein. Ehud Barak was also a friend of Epstein, the prime minister of Israel at the time. But he was being blackmailed by the Israeli right wing as well. And they stopped an agreement with Arafat. They were about to reach an agreement there for a two-state solution. But that was stopped because of Epstein. They were both being blackmailed by Epstein.
He's talking about blackmailing not only the presidents of the United States, but also those people in Israel who don't agree with their line of argument.
Nima, I've had occasion to do a number of case studies at both George Washington University and at William and Mary on those very talks. And I've had occasion to interview some people who are very close to those talks, some people who work for Madeleine Albright, who was then Secretary of State, some people who work directly for the President of the United States, William Clinton, and some people who worked with and alongside Dennis Ross, whom I consider, as I think I've said before, a traitor. Dennis Ross was working for Israel, not for the United States. I've also had occasion to talk with some people who were in the room, actually in the room, when they were having some very serious discussions that Israeli intelligence officer just referred to. And those two people, they were security people, but they were listening. And one of them actually spoke Hebrew. So he understood what was being said as asides by those who were speaking Hebrew. One of them's written a book, actually. No one's paid much attention to it, but that man just filled in some squares for me, Nima. He filled in some missing information for me because it is almost not understandable, not realizable that what happened in the middle of these discussions that, as he insinuated, looked every bit like they were going to be successful. When it falls apart, the Israelis make a massive effort to build almost overnight a publicity campaign that will blame the Arabs and blame Arafat. It hit Arafat so much in the face, he didn't know what hit him. He said so afterwards. He told Powell this at Ramallah later, that it bowled him over because they had such a campaign in the can ready to go, blaming him and blaming the Arabs for the failure of the talks. It was clear that they had done this because of some sudden change in the way the principals were acting. And they also told me Madeleine Albright was so out of it, she didn't even know what was going on, that it was clear to these people that she didn't even know what was going on. Dennis Ross was doing the U.S. with Clinton himself. So that adds ammunition, because I've always had a difficult time understanding precisely why this happened so fast, why there was a volte-face, a change of face, a change of agenda almost instantly, and why the Israelis were prepped to blame it all on the Arabs and Arafat when it should have taken at least a day or two to get that kind of campaign together. They had it in the can ready to go. So my only sound presumption is that they never wanted it to succeed. I think that goes for Dennis Ross too. But then you've got to ask yourself the question, if they got to the point where they got to, and success was staring them in the face, what was the final cause that shifted everything almost on a dime? That makes a lot of sense. I can't prove it, but that guy sounded like he probably could. And that fills in my appreciation of why those very successful talks, prompted, by the way, originally by H.W. Bush at the close of the first Iraq War, when he felt he had real power over the Israelis, developed during that war by him personally, telling them, you will not get in this war. You understand me? Read my lips. You will not be a part of this war. If Saddam Hussein shoots Scud missiles at you, which he did, you will not respond. You understand? And he sent people over there to watch them during the whole time. That's the reason they threw their weight through AIPAC behind Bill Clinton and got him elected instead of George Bush. Terrible mistake there for us, but we did it. So this all is a part of the warp and woof of the picture that I've been studying for the past 25 years and been a part of for about 5 of those years. And that makes perfect sense to me. Something was used to blackmail Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak. And that man just told me what it probably was.
And for the case of Donald Trump, Larry, what is that? Is that the main involvement of Donald Trump somehow convincing him, or he's somehow protecting some people?
I think a little bit of both. I wish I knew more about it. I've watched as many of the meaningful podcasts. I think I've even watched Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert because they're hammering it home too. I mean, it's satirical and it's humorous, but they're hammering home some facts too. I just saw one of the videos that Colbert used. I mean, these young girls are all around Trump, all around Epstein. They're there chatting about how pretty they are and how nice they are. And you look at some of them. I mean, some of them are the Oakland Raiders cheerleaders, I think, but others of them in the room are clearly not 21, not even 18. And Trump is there ogling them all. I mean, this is all happening in so many different segments of our society. The Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert part, and then the real part, like that gentleman you just played. This is going to topple this guy. This is going to topple Donald Trump. Ultimately, it's going to bring his presidency down.
So he's fighting for his survival, in your opinion?
He is. And watch him do all manner of things like getting Ghislaine Maxwell to make testimony that's just earth-shattering and completely clears him. And then she goes off into the sunset with a $1 million pocket prize and freedom. And look at anything like that happening, because this administration has no respect for the rule of law whatsoever. It has no respect for decent people doing their jobs the way they should be doing their jobs. It has no ethics. It has no scruples. It will do whatever it needs to do to stay in power. And that goes for all of them, not just Trump. That goes for everyone in this administration in a principal position and in some non-principal positions, because that's what they've been doing, is backfilling all these positions. Justice is in horrible shape right now. You know, justice is hard to do this to. I watched George Bush try to do it to justice. I watched a third of the lawyers at justice virtually over the first 4 years get up and leave. But it's hard to corrupt lawyers. They're probably the least corruptible people in the government because they do have something as a standard. Alan Dershowitz notwithstanding. Alan Dershowitz is the sorriest lawyer that ever walked the face of the earth. He has no ethics. And yet he uses the ethics of a lawyer, you know, in order to justify what he does. But most lawyers have some ethics and some respect for the rule of law. So I watched a third of the lawyers virtually just abandon justice because they didn't like what George W. Bush's attorney general was doing to justice. Well, this guy is 10 times worse, and his disciples are 10 times worse, like Bondi. So they're just exiting justice. Well, what are they doing? They're backfilling with cretins. I'm not even sure some of them have law degrees. So we're destroying the United States government is what we're doing. Trump is destroying the U.S. government.
So if he's in such fragile situation, I would assume what is going on with the two governments in Iran and Russia, they're trying to negotiate with him while he's in a bad situation. He needs to accommodate the government in Israel and those Europeans who are trying to escalate the situation in Ukraine.
It's a dangerous situation all around, no question about it. And then you've got, as I've said before, you've got this coterie of billionaires, and they don't have any political affiliation. Their political affiliation is expediency. But you've got this coterie of billionaires. I think there's probably as many as 50 of them who are watching what's happening, influencing what's happening in some case, and who are deathly afraid of China and deathly afraid of Russia allied with China. And they see the only path forward, and this is truly dangerous, is defying it, doing something to stop it. And they see Ukraine, the Arctic, the Baltic Sea, Kaliningrad, Armenia, Georgia, you name it along that arc of crisis I've talked about before. They see that as and Iran at the southern end. They see that as the only way to stop this inexorable movement of power. So they are behind the government, pushing like hell in order to get the United States to recognize in their minds that the only way to oppose this is with power, raw power, ultimately backed up by 5,987 or whatever it is nuclear warheads.
We know that you remember Ali Larijani, who is one of the closest characters to the Iranian supreme leader. He said before the attacks happening on Iran, he said that if they attack Iran, we're gonna build nuclear bombs.
I've told you what I think.
He's gonna be. I have a news for you. It wasn't announced yet, but today I talked with Morandi. He said that he's gonna be the head of Security Council in Iran to control everything.
It wouldn't surprise me a bit. I think they have made a decision. I think they're going to pursue that decision, and I think they are just short of being what we would call a threshold nuclear power. And whether or not they'll leave the non-proliferation treaty and do like Kim Jong-il did and Kim Jong-un after him, essentially declare to the world, same thing Israel does, might not be prominently declared, but it'll be, we got them. And then what are you going to do, Bibi? What are you going to do, Bibi, if you're still around? The state of Israel, I never thought that my predictions about the state of Israel as a Jewish state expiring forthwith would be so rapidly done. But they are rapidly destroying themselves. They are overextended. They can't possibly keep this up. Netanyahu actually apparently last maybe 48 hours ago or so, I'm told, not a very reliable source, but it is, I think, probably accurate information, has admitted that he can't keep it up. He can't keep up what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank right now. He can sort of put it on hold and keep everything aimed in the direction he wants it to be aimed in, which is the destruction of the Palestinians, the complete takeover of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and ultimately Gaza, and his forces ruling Gaza afterwards. He can make that happen, but that's about all he can make happen. And it's very treacherous because he has bled his military so badly that intelligence sources around the region, from Cairo to Amman to Baghdad to Damascus to Beirut, understand how badly the IDF is off right now. Not only do they understand that the IDF is a shadow of its former self, they also understand the truth about what Iran did to Israel. And those two things combined, with Turkey sitting on the sidelines and watching, might just bring Israel down more precipitously than I'm thinking. In other words, day after tomorrow, or something really not too far out there. Israel's doomed. As a Jewish state, Israel is doomed.
We know that Steve Witkoff, he tried to contact Iranians to talk with them. And he's again trying to talk with Russians as well. But in the eyes of you talk with Russians, you talk with Iranians, there is no room for diplomacy. They don't see any sort of room that Donald Trump could offer to them.
We don't know how to do diplomacy, Neiman. We've lost the art. We've lost the skill. We just don't know how to do it. We don't have any inclination to do it. No empathy and sympathy, which is absolutely a prerequisite for good diplomacy. We just don't have the skills anymore. And Marco Rubio has been a farce. He's been a farce. I've watched him in particular because I have this sort of, appreciation for state. I was there for 4 years. And he has not done much at all in either of his capacities. In fact, I'm not even sure Trump treats him as national security advisor. I can't see any sign. The primary reason for a national security advisor, Nima, is to look over the interagency group, what we used to call the cabinet, which is really not a tool of use much anymore, except for press conferences. It looks over the entire apparatus of the U.S. government, especially those that are involved in, that's almost all of them now, in national security. Think about it: Treasury, It's involved in national security. Hell, we made him a member of the NSC. Energy, that's a member of the NSC too, usually for any president, because it's very critical, and energy has the nuclear weapons. All the infrastructure of the United States government is supposed to be coordinated by who? The National Security Advisor. Marco Rubio is not coordinating his toenails. So who is coordinating the U.S. government? No one. Donald Trump tweets it every now and then. Donald Trump mandates that this or that happen every now and then. Donald Trump turns to the Treasury chief and says, tariffs on this country. Turns to the Fed and says, you're fired, and nothing happens. But no one is coordinating the complex, everyday security interests of the United States in the National Security Council process. No one.
The new administration, Larry, they were talking about the case of Iran and Russia somehow differently. They tried to put some sort of facts out that gave us some hope about the future. But it seems that as time goes by, things are getting more serious. They're repeating the rhetoric on the part of Netanyahu. They're repeating the rhetoric on the part of Zelensky. They're not following the line they were talking about it before. And do you think it's all about Donald Trump himself? And you mentioned that he's in a fragile situation and he's trying to survive. But how about the administration? How about J.D. Vance? Where is he?
That's a good question about Vance. I can't answer it either because I don't know the man at all, and I haven't been able to ferret out enough sources to fashion some kind of concept of him. It's either on the one side where he's a villain par excellence, or it's on the other side where he's the only sane member of the administration. I don't find anyone who's in between somewhere. They're either he's terrible or he's the only sane member. So I don't know. I don't understand. And if it's a basically fundamentally the same kind of vice president we've had for 200 plus years, he's eviscerated. He doesn't have any power. Not really. Dick Cheney was the first person in American history to energize and make very, very powerful for at least 4 years the vice presidency. And he did that by a unique interpretation of the Constitution and a unique combination of bureaucratic entrepreneurial powers in his own self, because he'd been in so many places, including a 34-year-old White House chief of staff. This was a genius at bureaucratic entrepreneurship. No vice president has ever been powerful before. Not even Al Gore, whom Clinton tried to think was powerful, but he wasn't. Go back and look at some of the things that were done. You understand Al Gore had no power at all. So is J.D. Vance in that mold? I think so. I think he has zero power to do anything. So if he's the one thing, the character that is sane and sound, his sanity and his soundness is not being employed. If he's the crazy guy, he's joining in. So it's no good either way. Vice presidents only have the power, ask John Garner, they only have the power that the president surrenders to them. And presidents are usually very, very reluctant to surrender anything substantive. And no president will surrender national security decisions to the vice president, except George W. Bush. Yeah. Unique presidency.
It feels that J.D. Vance is one of the characters, one of the officials that they don't have any sort of dirt on him. Any sort of
could be, which would give him a little maneuver room that the others don't have, and which would give him a good chance of taking over the presidency when Trump is successfully removed from office by impeachment. Wouldn't that be something? I don't think he will go down, though. I don't think he will go down that way. I think he'll try to take over. Then the question becomes who will support him.
Here is Larry, Speaker Johnson going to Israel and
Oh
talking
my
about.
God! Don't play that for me. Nauseous. Nauseous.
So you've heard what he said.
Oh yeah, nauseous. I mean, it's bad
What's
as
going on in the mind of these people, Larry? How
what?
can they somehow they kill Christians there?
Wearing his little cap too. Ben Gavir on top of the mount, violating every known rule that they've developed painstakingly over the last 30 years. And this is absolutely insane. It's insane. And it's insane, particularly, these people are all crucifying themselves in terms of their political careers, Mike Johnson included. They're crucifying themselves because the weight that's going to swing against them eventually, it takes time for that pendulum to gather steam and come roaring at your face, Mr. Speaker, but it's going to. And riding that pendulum is going to be about 200 million Americans angry as hell at what you've done to them.
Turkey is trying to, Larry, is trying to send actually Azerbaijan is sending gas and oil to Syria via Turkey, and the Turkish government is helping the whole thing. I don't know what's going on in the mindset of Israelis when they see that, and how is that going? Is that of concern, in your opinion, for the Netanyahu administration?
I don't think any external power and its influence over what does or does not happen in Israel is impacting Netanyahu anymore. I don't think he has a mind for that anymore. He has so convinced himself of his own rectitude. And that's reinforced by the fact that if he isn't right, he's dead in jail or whatever, that he's not, there's no external influence on Bibi Netanyahu anymore. Donald Trump and Witkoff could tell him all day long, don't do that, don't do this. If he doesn't agree with it, he's not going to do it. And that's the start of and the greatest sign of megalomania, in my view. And that's his worst enemy right now, his own megalomania.
In Lebanon, they're trying to disarm Hezbollah, and they a lot of pressure. They're putting a lot of pressure on Hezbollah. And yesterday we saw that people came out and protesting, supporting Hezbollah.
And you better believe that big embassy we just built there, that expensive $1 billion, huge, monstrous embassy there, is helping us to bring as much pressure as we can on the Lebanese government. And ultimately, we'll probably try to influence the Lebanese people too, if we're not doing it already, because that's our forte. That's what the CIA, MI6, and Mossad do best, is propaganda and lies. And part of that propaganda and lie will be, do you ever want to recover Lebanon? Do you ever want an economy back? Do you ever want to be an integral state again? Then you better do what we tell you to do. When in fact, the truth is, if you do what we tell you to do, you will be Israel's vassal for as far as you can see into the future, because that's the deceit the United States of America practices now, whether it be Ukraine or it be Lebanon or almost anywhere else in the world. We are the most deceitful nation on the face of the earth.
If we assume, Larry, let's put it this way, is there any country in the Middle East, despite, and if you put Iran aside, to go against Israel? Is there any sort of force? And we know that in Lebanon, Hezbollah is trying to fight back. Hamas is trying to fight back, but they're trying to disarm these groups, these people. So why in the world the government in Lebanon would think that disarming Hezbollah would benefit Lebanon in a long run? And who's going to guarantee that for them?
Well, the shadow hovering behind everything is the empire. That's what stops anyone from doing anything that might otherwise seem sane, sober, and needed, like taking down Israel. Because there's no question in my mind if Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, even Syria in its current status where it's been, robbed of its munitions, if you will, by Israeli airstrikes, if they all acted in concert, which I know is a big question always with Arab armies. It seems to be a question that Lawrence had, T.E. Lawrence had, even when he was trying to get them to fight in his war. But if they were able to conduct themselves in a concerted way, they destroy Israel in 48 hours. 48 hours. And throw Iran into that, prepping the battlefield, so to speak. In other words, everything Iran's got thrown at Israel before the ground attack took place, Israel will be gone. Might be gone just in the onslaught from Iran, but it'd certainly be gone when armored columns poured in from all these other countries. And Erdogan, that son of a bitch, would probably jump in at the last minute because he'd want to be in for the kill. If you can't have the U.S. and Israel and the combination that's so profitable for you, well, just, discard the whole thing at one time, because the world is changing on you, Erdogan. It's changing as you watch. If that were to happen, you still got the United States to deal with. I don't know what we do, Neiman. I don't. I really don't. With this administration, I have no idea what we would do. Would we put Donovan on the ground, move him and his 100,000 troops out of Europe, parachute them into Israel, and say, okay, we're here now, so everybody go away? I don't know. That's the big question. And that's the question in all these minds, Cairo's, Amman's, Beirut, Damascus. What will the empire do? Because we still have enough residual power to make their lives, should they take really decisive action against Israel, very hard. We still have that kind of residual power, particularly in that region where we have more troops than we have anywhere else in the world. People say, well, no, we got all these troops in Europe. I said, no, you haven't counted the heads. Now, they aren't combat troops for the most part. They're support troops, service support troops, combat service support, combat support troops. But there are lots of them there, and there's just enormous firepower at Al Udeid and at other airfields in Saudi Arabia. That's the real fly in the ointment, if you will, for everyone in the region, is the empire. Even badly led, as we are right now, and maybe even more so because we're badly led, as we saw with what happened to Iran. I still have trouble buying the fact that we helped Israel pull a Yamamoto-type attack on Iran. I'm sure that the lusty people like Pete Hegseth would say they're subhuman, just like Netanyahu says about the Palestinians. They're subhuman, so it's not like we were not subhuman at Pearl Harbor. We were the number one country in the world at Pearl Harbor, and they attacked us out of the night. They attacked us, killed 2,400 people, bombed our ships and everything. Surprise attack. Well, you did the same thing to Iran. Well, Iran's the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. When the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world is Saudi Arabia, and second, Israel. With the operations on the West Bank and in Gaza right now, Israel is the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world. Terrorism is using force against civilians. That's what terrorism is in a nutshell. What else is Israel doing?
One of the Iranian officials yesterday said that he's so close. He knows what's going on. His name is Safar Harandi. He was the minister in Iran. He had various positions, but he's so close to the leadership as well. And he said that Israelis made a phone call to Russians before the war with Iran, demanding Russia would stop its cooperation with Iran because Iran will not exist for much longer. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. I believe it. I believe it. I believe it. Wasn't he sort of like a minister of the interior or something?
Exactly.
Like? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I believe that. That's the braggadocio and the arrogance of the Israeli government.
They thought that they would change everything by that. It's unbelievable.
And that makes what actually happened and the slow creeping knowledge of what actually happened all the way up to the Caucasus all the more powerful. There's no one out there, Nima. In Tbilisi, they know this. They know that Israel got its ass handed to it by Iran and that Iran has the potential to complete the job.
Larry, I want to wrap it up with the case of Brazil, Lula. He came
My
out
favorite
and
leader.
yeah. Here is what he said. We have this. It has the subtitles, but it is in Portuguese. Yeah, here is what he said.
Obviamente que eu não vou deixar de compreender a importância da relação diplomática com os Estados Unidos, que já dura 201 anos. Eu não vou esquecer que eles também já deram o golpe aqui, ajudaram a dar o golpe. Mas o que eu quero saber é daqui para frente o que é que eu faço. E daqui para frente eles têm que saber que nós temos o que negociar. Nós temos tamanho, nós temos postura, nós temos interesses econômicos e interesses políticos para negociar. Eu não vou abrir mão de achar que a gente precisa procurar construir uma moeda alternativa para que a gente possa negociar com os outros países. Eu não preciso ficar subordinado ao dólar.
Yeah. What he said, Larry, resuming what he said that our first option is diplomacy. We want to talk. We want to negotiate.
Absolutely.
But we remember, I will not forget that they tried to stage a coup here in Brazil.
And in half a dozen other South American countries.
And he's talking that if they continue this way, we're seriously thinking about the dollarization and all of that. But usually when you want to, let's assume you want to fight China, Russia, you would assume that you go and find friends, not enemies. The United States is in the process of making new enemies. It doesn't make any sort of friends. I don't see Brazil. Actually, in Brazil, nobody would have thought that the United States would impose 50% tariffs on Brazil. It's unbelievable.
Nima, let's look at one aspect of this for just a moment, because I've just read a paper on this and become a little more informed than I was before. If you look at what is supposedly happening with BRICS and others, and I don't know, I'd love to talk to Lula about this. Reserve currency status, transactional currency status, is not something new. It goes all the way back at least to the Western Roman Empire. And it comes forward to the modern age, if you will, with the Dutch and the guilder. That was a de facto reserve currency, so to speak. And then big time with the pound sterling, with the British Empire. In other words, Nima, there have been countries before us who had the reserve transactional currency in much of the world, if not the world, like the British. They're gone. They're gone. And many economists and historians who have an economic background will tell you that one of the reasons was because they had the reserve currency. It is an imperial destroying situation. There is not an empire that ever practiced a reserve currency position that didn't disappear. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And some of them are predominantly economic. You destroy yourself. You destroy yourself with inflation. You destroy yourself with defeating that which made you the person or the state that could do that, manufacturing in our case. And then you erode slowly. Xi Jinping knows that. That's why he does not want to have a reserve currency for the yuan. Last thing he wants is that. We need some kind of situation that's globally satisfactory and has no hegemon behind it. and no currency behind it of note. We're destroying ourselves. We're destroying ourselves by being, in a certain sense, not just badly led, but being the state that has the reserve currency in the world. And it's going to happen. And Lula doesn't need to worry about it because it's going to happen. What they need to worry about is finding a way to trade commodities, if you will, like oil, like gas, like methane, like food, and so forth, in their own currencies. And a system that will allow that to happen and balance out the differences, if you will. That's what's happening. That's already happening. On the Amur River, between Russia and China now, there's more commerce going on than you can shake a stick at, probably more than is going on in any U.S. state. And it's all being done in commodity exchange or in currencies of note, of the Chinese currency or the Russian currency. And building banks for that is fairly simple. You don't even need a concrete structure or anything. You can do it in computers now. So this is all to say that we're hurting, Nima. We're hurting badly. And as you said, to get to your point, we need friends, not enemies. We need friends desperately to help us work through this period that all empires have gone through and been the worse for it when they got through. You know, one of the reasons Eisenhower could turn to the Prime Minister of England in 1956 and get your damn troops out of Suez? Because he threatened to run on the pound in the IMF. Point made. I mean, we've put ourselves in an extraordinarily precarious position, and we have an idiot leading us, and idiots arrayed around him helping him. God save the king.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today.
Sorry to get so particular at the end there, but it's just, who can save us now?
I would argue it's just the United States can save the United States.
We need to find better leadership. We need better speakers of the House. We need better Senate majority leaders. We need better senators, better representatives, better presidents, better secretaries of state. We need a whole lot. I don't see them. I don't see them anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
I'm sure that some of that series from Tiberius down to Nero and Caligula, and they probably said the same thing. Oh, tempora o mores, said Cicero. Senatus haec intelligit, consul vidit, hic tamen vivit. Translated, O times, O customs. The consul sees it, the Senate sees it, and yet he lives. The traitor, the dictator. God, I forgot his name now. But that's where we are. That's where we are. And I dedicated my life to a lot of that. Makes one ill when one thinks about it. Take care of yourself in Brazil. By the way, I heard this morning from a friend who just come back from, I think, La Paz, that Morales is putting himself on the ballot and running again, even though the Constitution forbids it.
Yeah.
Has Lula said anything about that?
I haven't heard him talking about Morales.
Yeah, I'd keep my fingers out of it probably if I were he.
Yeah.
Morales has done a lot of good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
But it's probably not time to be a caudillo.
Yeah. I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you. Take care, Larry.
Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Yep. Friday.
Yeah,
Larry
Friday.
squared.
Yeah. Exactly.
Take care.